Which language will we use?
English, obviously.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
English.
Dutch, maybe. Cantonese, Chinese. I speak Chinese. But...
So let me say a few words at the beginning. It's very nice to meet you. I've got one brilliant idea. When you start talking between each other, I will disappear so that give you more space in the screen. Okay? So it is very nice to meet you, Agnieszka. Hello.
Hi. Najpierw przedstawię w języku polskim, potem przejdziemy na angielski. Witam Państwa na kolejnym panelu Polsko-Polonijnej Unii Gospodarczej. Dzisiaj zmieniliśmy termin z czwartku na sobotę z powodu tego, że mamy możliwość porozmawiać na antenie z Chuckiem Konkelem z policji w Toronto. Welcome, Chuck.
It's good to be here with you. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Welcome, Wojtek.
Dzień dobry wszystkim.
Chuck Konkel is Senior Staff Sargent, Toronto Police.
That's me.
Yeah.
Do you have a gun?
Not today. No.
It's a really important person.
In the armory. Yeah.
We know about the situation in the world right now. It's really dangerous. That's why we want to speak with you, and we have a couple of questions. Wojtek, oddaję Ci głos. Prosiłabym, żebyś poprowadził te pytania i tą rozmowę za mnie dzisiaj, aby wszystko było zrozumiałe i żebym nie popełniła jakiegoś błędu, ponieważ jest to bardzo poważny temat, a jesteście panowie obydwoje na miejscu.
Tak jest.
So let me disappear so that you have more space on the screen, and I will listen to every word you speak.
The current situation in the world is very difficult, and for business people who consider Canada the security and safety of those business and personal safety in the country, or they may be interested in doing business in, is extremely important. Hence, we ask you to give us a perspective on policing in Canada. Currently, we have a huge demonstrations, anti-racist demonstration, and more incidents come to light showing that Canada is not that much better than the United States. So I want to ask you, from your perspective, as a long-term police officer and manager of the force in Toronto, do you see systematic problems, anti-racist problem within the force itself?
Well, to begin with, let's put things into perspective. I'd like to start with the comparison of the Polish National Police, the Canadian model, and the American model, so people have an understanding. The Polish police force is one service, and so it has a central head and central rules and central regulations. Canada is a federal state, so it has 10 provinces, a federal police force, which is the RCMP, and provincial forces. There is also municipal forces. Now, the third model I want to explain is the American model, and it's a completely different model than a unified one Polish police service, or a Canadian model with provincial police, a federal police, and regional police. Well, there are a lot of regions too. The American model, where Canada has perhaps 150 distinct police agencies, that includes the Border Security, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Ontario Provincial Police, the Quebec Sûreté, because they speak French, they're bilingual. The American model has 18,000 police agencies. I want people to feel safer in Canada because what you see in the American model is not what we have here. I admit to horrible things happening in the world, but with social media becoming so prevalent, and with the internet becoming the means of communication, there is no reasonable discussion. And so you see a video, you assume it's true, and then suddenly it becomes true. I think in the cases that I've seen in Canada, there is some reasonable doubt in my mind that the police acted properly. And there's 4 instances. When I look at the American model, I have several more problems. Where the American model fails, and I can't even speak to the Polish model. Although I was in Poland, I was in Legionowo, and I actually was the aide to Mark Popała many years ago, training the national police in Poland on organized crime. The Canadian model has oversight bodies. It has a use of force compendium. That means a model for how every time you accelerate the use of force, you have to justify, put it on paper, and you can be held accountable for it. Only 1/3 of the American states, and I've done a lot of research on this, only 1/3 of the American states have a use of force model. That none of them have a oversight model where you actually investigate. So in Ontario, there's a special investigation unit. In Alberta, there's an investigation unit. Independent of the police. They are not police officers. And I think it's important to understand, for the bad that is seen on television in the Canadian experience, compare it to the good that's being done and the checks and balances. It's, if a police officer does something wrong, he should be charged. He is charged. And he is investigated through the process by an independent agency, and if necessary, criminally charged by the courts. The Americans don't have the same model. And it's troubling for me because they have so many agencies that no one knows who to turn to. And in the sense, when we look at Black Lives Matter and proportionally human lives matter, we look at Black Lives Matter, that is not just a police issue. That is a societal issue. It's deeper than just saying the police are evil. I've seen, in Camden, New Jersey, there's a Polish chief of police, Wysocki, who has done some remarkably good work, Polish-American, who's done remarkably good work in engaging the community. When I was in Poland many years ago, the distance that they have traveled from the last visit I was in Poland was remarkable. And I think the Europeans have a different functionality. They exist differently because their experience of immigration numbers is not as demanding, as pervasive as the Canadian model. We have more immigrants than any other nation in the world proportionate. And so there is cultural clash, there is dynamics, but we do outreach programs in Ontario and across Canada. So I think it's wrong to look at a television capture and say this is reality because of someone's little video camera. I think you have to have a reasonable discussion. What's lacking in policing in North America, and perhaps the world, is a reasonable discussion of why we have police. Defunding police is fascinating. I love that term. Like defund, get rid of the money, put it elsewhere. But we already do that. We have retired police officers in Ontario doing use of force reports, or doing phone call reports. We have retired police officers in the recruiting model. We have nurses working with police officers on critical incidents. So we're already on the path to removing a lot of the previous functions, because at 4 in the morning, to my audience in Poland and to people in the business community, at 4 in the morning, I don't think you're going to find a psychologist or psychiatrist who's going to be available when a critical incident happens.
And the police have to go
and we have to deal with it. And I've done 44 years of policing. I've policed Hong Kong, because I was an inspector in Hong Kong. I've policed in Europe as working. I taught at Bramshill, the British Academy, at Legionowo, and the Canadian National Academy. And I'm an operational police officer. I'm still a police officer. So I don't think you can sort of make it a simple, one little picture and that makes everyone evil. The world is not that simple, and we have to have reasonable discussion about it.
Yeah, talking about reasonableness, I had some statistics that in Canada there's about 12 million interventions a year by police, and there's maybe a handful of really grave incidents.
I get the morning report every day, and we intervene by either, we have use of force, right? The first thing we do is, as I'm doing with you, we talk, right? And the first thing I learned when I became a police officer, when I was going to do a PhD, I was going to be a professor. And some say maybe that was a mistake. But when I first went into police work, it wasn't my chosen profession. But then I fell in love with it. I felt very much that it was something, as my father is Polish, he was a Polish soldier, and it's part of my culture to work in a community and to make it better. But talk. So and the people who carry the heavy guns in our service, because we are armed in Canada, because we suffer because the American model has so many weapons and the border is reasonably open except for COVID, of course, but we still get guns. I don't know how that works. We still get guns in Canada, even though you can't cross the border. So, but they come from the States. And so we are armed, and so we have to realize how to deal with people. Most of our people are in distress. The danger is when someone's in distress and has a weapon, an edged weapon, a knife, you have to, and I've faced that, and syringes, you know, it's a hard call because you have pepper spray, you have what you call a device that is a taser, you have your stick, you have your talk, and when all else fails and he's running at you, you have 30 seconds to decide what that knife's going to do to your body. In the movies, you shoot for the knee, you shoot for the arm. It's not realistic. You just want to get out. If you're caught in a room, nobody wants to be caught in a room. We spend days every year training on disengagement and de-escalation. So I'm not talking like I'm the learned guy in the room, although I think he's pretty smart too. I think we're talking from the experience of humans. And what we want to do is understand that policemen are humans, but they're trained to do certain things. And when a human talks to a human and someone pulls a knife and attacks that human, they tend to call the police. And now we're already into the knife. Now you talk and you talk and you talk, and suddenly what he lunges at you. If a gun's a different game, I'm sorry. But knifing offenses in Europe, from what I've seen in the statistics, are really very prevalent. The United Kingdom, knifing. And it is a very naive Netflix view of the world if you assume that someone with a knife is not going to harm you. I mean, I cut my finger this morning and I'm almost bleeding to death. Yeah. So you can witness. In
1 second, the person can cover a couple of meters.
Well, there is.
So you don't have much time.
There is a 9-foot thing. It takes you 2 to 3 seconds. It's 9 feet. It's a circle. Yeah. And they've proven it when we do our training every year, and we go through the same scenarios. So, like, if you think you're comfortable, how comfortable are you after this guy's already knifed you? Yeah. And body armor works, but it doesn't always work, and there's parts of your body that aren't covered.
Yeah, covers on the contrary. Listen, we have been talking in this series before about how Polacks and Polonia are being viewed in Canadian society, and you have a unique sort of understanding of it because you have access to statistics and your own observation. So, how would you evaluate the Polish community here in Canada? How Polacks are viewed as a group?
I think it's generational. I think the post-war generation, my parents, my father, who's now deceased, came here thankful that there was a home and that they weren't going to a communist country, because if he'd gone back to Poland, and I think it's pretty well evident that he would have been put in prison, if not worse. So then we have the Solidarność movement, which actually, I think the word solidarity is being so used around the world that we forget its origin. It is the Poles who created solidarity as a movement for the world. It didn't come out of a telephone book. It didn't come out of a dictionary. It was the Poles who created the first word of solidarity, what it meant. Now everyone uses it on the press releases in North America. I show solidarity with you. I'm in solidarity with you. Okay. It's lost its meaning. The next generation are post-communist Poles who came here. They're entrepreneurs. They're business people. And now we're into the next generation who are moving back and forth fluidly between Poland and Canada. Canadian Poles are pretty homogeneous. They fit well with the Canadian community. They integrate very well. But every so often, I have to remind people that my father is Polish. I don't speak it. My generation, we were beaten up. I'll be blunt. We were displaced persons, and if you showed you were a Polak or anything, I have spray paint on my house, DP, go home. And so instead of Kazimierz, I became Chuck. But my love is with Poland. I've worked with the Polish government. I've worked with veterans associations. I want to keep the history of Polonia alive in Canada. There are a lot of very famous Poles, both in Canada and the United States. Kościuszko, right? Canada, Pulaski, You know, and so we are quite. The problem we face is we're not in Canada. We're not really showing the pride we could show in our nation. And I'm not talking about the politics of the nation. That's a different thing. Politicians, and I won't get into the politics of politics.
But from the level of policing, Polacks as a group, do they create a problem?
No, no. In fact, the real sad part is there's so many police officers who are Polish in Toronto, the regional services here, the Ontario Provincial Police, the RCMP, a large number of skis, and right? A lot of Polacks are in policing. But we take it as part of who we are. And so we integrate because that's what, you know, the largest diaspora I've heard in the world, next to the Chinese, the Polish diaspora, in Australia, in Europe, in the UK, in Canada. In policing in Canada, we are Canadians first, Poles second, but we forget that part of our being Polonia is being proud of our history. And that history is not, you know, it's millennium old. We have survived in the fact that the Polish nation and is resilient and bounces back as a nation is the linchpin, the central thing for every Pole to remember. If I was investing Poland in Canada, I'd invest back and forth, and there's so many links.
Yeah. Listen, from my experience, I came into Canada in 1983, and I actually was in a group of people who came, which is the newest wave of Polonia, really, in
yes.
a large number, which was post-Solidarity immigration wave. And we all benefited from the multiculturalism, from this policy yes. of and there's no reason not to admit that you're Polish anymore.
No.
So everybody admits that, whether you're a doctor, a policeman, or a laborer, or lawyer, people know where you're from.
Yes.
So I think that also helped us because I heard some statistics that we were as a group prosperous just behind the Jewish community. That as a group we are quite a prosperous community.
I think we are. I'm astounded by the resilience of a Polish person coming here. Remember, this generation of Poles speaks English. I don't speak Polish. They speak English and Polish, and in my case, right, I regret I've not learned it. But this is a very important factor in international economy and globalization. Whether you say globalization is dead or not, international trade exists. And the trick is to find, as you said, Wojtek, at the beginning, is Canada a safe country to do business in? Well, that's the easiest answer I can give you. Yes, it is. Compared to the American model, not that America's bad, please. It's horrible to complain about America, which, despite of what you say, is a thriving democracy with free press and the ability to protest. And the violence is not the issue, but protesting is allowed, certainly. There's a large Polish community in Chicago, used to be Detroit, Buffalo, and New York City has a large Polish community, and they're active and integrated, and they work hard. The Toronto, and some lesser extent, and Edmonton and Winnipeg, Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal have Polish communities, but I don't know if the linkages are economic yet. I think they're social, and the trick is to create economic links because economy is the best forecaster of success, and the best forecaster of success for two nations to have joint economic growth. So the fact that Poland is active in NATO, for me, is a wonderful thing.
Talking about the violence and demonstrations, can you elaborate what are the actually tactics used by the police force to manage the demonstrations? And because quite often when people complain about it, you can see that sometimes police uses too much force against the peaceful protesters, and at the same time they let the sort of people run around and rob stores and stuff, and there's no police inside. Why does that happen?
Because you see the worst and you don't see all.
Yeah.
We had protests for the Black community, Afro-Canadian community 2 weeks ago in Toronto, peaceful. We worried next week there'd be violence, and we negotiated, we talked to them, and they said, peaceful is allowed, put up your signs, do what you want. The stores were boarding up windows thinking, oh, this will be like the United States. They were afraid. Nothing happened. Will there be violence in a society of 2.3 million people? Will anarchists and revolutionaries, and they will do that.
And just thieves.
Yeah,
just when I use the occasion.
Yeah, and just thieves. You can say that. I did. But you will find that. But I don't think you're going to find the Canadian psyche is different. Even the protesters who scream the loudest, when you rationalize with them and say, look, we'll allow the protest. Where's your route? We'll allow you the protest, blah, blah. That happens. And I think there's a massive difference. Yet in the United States, there are at least 200 cities with protests, all peaceful.
Yeah.
So you heard about Chicago, New York, and LA.
Yeah.
But sometimes in between, and even the Black Lives Matter, the term is different from when I grew up with Black Panthers, but the Black Lives Matter protests from the 1960s and those in the 2020 are different. And the actual legitimate protesters wanted no business with the anarchists and radicals.
Right. Okay, but let's go back. What's the sort of tactics, typical tactics? So first of all, you negotiate.
Negotiate, and well, we don't use the same riot police model the Americans do. Even our public order units, it's a funny term, but first thing the public order unit is negotiate. You try to, and I've done that work, is you try to engage people person to person. It's a very tiring tactic, but it works. Because if you start engaging, this idea of, stone face, say nothing, is probably not the best idea, unless they're really wanting to harm you. But you can talk to a person. You have to make it a personal thing. Say, look, I understand what you're doing. I understand. It's not a form of therapy. These people have real concerns, and you have to allow them to publicly protest and get their media. Most protesters want a media bite. They want to get in the media. They want to get their message across. You are just, the police are just another piece of the puzzle. The last thing I would want, or any of my officers would want, is to be shown in a violent camera shot, because that destroys all the good work we do.
Yeah. I have a concrete example, because a few years back we had a Tamil protest. They demonstrated extremely peacefully, actually. There was no damage. They even were cleaning after themselves.
Yes.
But at one point, one day, they decided to enter the highway and block the highway. Why was that allowed to happen? Because that became dangerous at some point.
Well, it did. And in fairness, without commenting on the individuals involved, I think one of the two sides didn't play with the rules that they gave us. And we had arranged the rules, we'd agreed to the rules, and then, there has to be a bit of trust on both sides. You're allowed to protest, you're allowed to do this, you're allowed to do that. Because ultimately, public order or public safety are interchangeable terms. And public safety means not just because you want to protest, because you could put risk to the children in a protest, you could put risk to other passengers, other people. People have no idea of why you're protesting, and they walk into it suddenly, and all of a sudden, what am I facing? So you can't assume because you're protesting that the world enjoys or entertains or even understands your protest. So the trick there is to allow it, but you have to set certain guidelines. It's not hard guidelines, but you don't go on the highway. Yeah. Once you're on the highway, we can't do anything about it. But that was because we had engaged, and I know the officer is now retired. We'd spoken, negotiated, and engaged with the Tamil community, and I've worked with them extensively. Yeah. And the deal was that there are certain roads. Then suddenly they veered off, and all the police officers we had put in for the passive protest, right? There was not enough force. There was not enough, and then the decision is what, to beat up people because they go on the highway. It sounds a horrible thing to say that you stop a highway, but conversely, when do you start beating up people because they're on the highway? Do you arrest 5,000 people? Yeah. I was talking to the police chief back then, and he was explaining it that once they decided to go up, there was very little to be done to forcefully remove them, because it is a very steep ramp, and they were children. Yes. And if you start pushing people, they may fall off. And so the inspector in charge was on a bicycle. We had 5 bicycles at the front, we had bicycles on the side, but we're not going to put up bicycle barriers to say stop, and then all of a sudden people start pushing into people. Yeah. Because up to that point, the protest was very peaceful. So the tactics is very involved, and it changes on the fly. It changes, but there has to be negotiation at all parts. Yeah. It's what I said at the beginning of our discussion. When you engage people in de-escalation, all of it's talk and negotiation. And you have to be very skilled to sort of negotiate and realize there's certain levels you can't negotiate, right? In the hostage taking, you can't negotiate freedom for the hostage, or freedom for the person who's holding people hostage, but you can negotiate a peaceful resolution. Right. So now I'm going to ask you to gaze in your crystal ball.
and try to, using your experience, and because there were some situations like that in the past when there was a big change and negotiation and all that. Where do you think the situation is going? Do you believe in solution that we find in negotiations? Or are you afraid, like I am afraid, that some extreme views may take hold and the logic will be done?
Well, the first thing I have to tell you as a police officer, I have no personal views.
Okay.
Right? I'm governed by my political masters, by elected politicians in our society. That's a democracy. And so I would hope, as a private citizen, that politicians realize it's not just about getting a headline. It's not about just favoring a community or not listening to a community, but they have to sit down and negotiate. They have, and I can negotiate with a man with a knife, but I have a problem negotiating social change. That's not my job. I do not get involved as a police officer in a democracy in saying this is right, this is wrong. If politically the persons who are my masters, right, because I have a police board of civilians, if they determine that's our course of action, if it's lawful, if it's authorized, I'll do it. But I'm not here sort of picking sides, and we have to be very careful.
So let me ask you a different way, because you're also a writer.
Yeah.
So if you were to write a novel about current situation, where do you see it's going?
It'd be a blank page. Because I don't know. But I'm optimistic, because I think what happens, and we talked about this earlier, you have right now some people who are very radical, very angry, and very frustrated for a variety of reasons, some legitimate, some just because it gives sociologists a job. I'm sorry.
No.
But there are a lot of
some people that are more
back.
Emotional than others.
Yeah, some people, I think most people are sitting back with COVID and all the other crises and finances and the unease in the world and the worries. People are sitting back waiting for somebody to say, okay, slow down, let's talk. And I don't see that happening yet. I think it will happen. I don't think you jump, how high do you jump every time someone says jump? I think it's more a case of saying, okay, let me get a ladder and we'll both go up this ladder, as opposed to you telling me how high to jump. So leadership is very critical, but leadership doesn't come from the police. We reflect our society in many respects, but we also have a responsibility to uphold the law, to be fair, to be reasonable. Seems simple. That's the hardest thing I ever do.
Yes. Yeah, because it all depends on the interaction with people, and sometimes something that seems reasonable to you may not seem reasonable to others that look from outside. I have a very little experience with the law enforcement, and that was the thing. Once you find yourself in the situation, all your sort of preset notions go out of the window, so training then has to take over. Because your emotions take better of you sometimes, so training is extremely important.
Well, I think the other thing to keep in mind, other than the fact that I'm actually tall and I'm sitting back, I just realized I'm not that short. The other thing we have to realize, my audience is thinking this guy's crazy. The other thing we have to realize is that the education level of many police officers is far higher than when I first joined. I joined with a master's degree, and what do you do with a master's degree?
Most of the guys were high school.
Probably. Now we have not just university graduates, but new Canadians, people who speak many languages, people who have job experience, people who have themselves gone through the change of coming to Canada and understanding that there's 144 languages. 144 languages spoken in Toronto, not just Kashuba, but Toronto. That's a lot of things you got to get used to. And each language brings with its own bias. Each language brings its own history. Its culture, its various, it brings its past from Europe and Africa and Asia. It brings its own sense of their right and wrong.
Let me tell you, to this day, when I cross border to the United States especially, I feel weird. I feel sort of, I wouldn't say afraid, but I'm not at ease. Because crossing Poland in the communist regime, crossing the border in Poland was a really threatening experience, because those police forces from, the border patrol from Germany or from Czech Republic could sometimes behave totally unpredictably and give you a really hard time. So that thing is, listen, I'm 30 years removed from there and I'm still processing this. It's still in the back of my mind. the police officer is not a friend. In Poland, there was a milicja obywatelska. It was communist regime police. So as a student, we were threatened by them just for being a student.
Then you can understand in Canada how some people feel about us historically as police. And I'm not saying that I feel that way about us, and I'm not.
Of course not. Yeah.
But you've experienced. I remember traveling through the Czech Republic 5-6 years ago, and I was pulled over because I didn't have a sticker for traveling on the highway. And the officer said that you can pay me. I'm not saying it was good or bad. I don't know what the system is. So that's the system. That's the system. Did I get a receipt? No. Did I pay? He has a gun. What do you do?
Yes, you pay.
I'm not saying that's wrong. I don't know. I don't know. What I'm saying is I don't know there's.
Yeah, you don't know whether the
or that files it, that he's on camera. I don't know. So I can't presume the gentleman was evil or wrong, corrupt. Maybe it's how they process things.
Okay. So the last thing I'm gonna let you do is plug your new book.
Oh, bestseller! I've written 2 books so far. One was the 4th highest advance in Canadian publishing history, and it is very well.
It was a story about
Glorious East Wind. Glorious East Wind.
Yes.
It was a story about Hong Kong, and it did so well that 85,000 copies were sold. In the country, it sells 5,000. Second book was Ben Affleck, if you've ever heard of Ben Affleck, was filming Paycheck. He canceled filming Paycheck because they wanted to buy the rights to the second book. And I had a producer who was going to film. This third book is about Poland and Poland in the Second World War. Polish history, but from a lens it's different. Because I want, and I've told my friends in Polonia and also my publishers, that I want to do it from a Canadian lens, North American lens, because I think there was a book many years ago by Michener called Poland, which is nice but not really current. I want to talk about the problems Poland faced during the war with the occupation by both the Germans and Russians. Katyin's mentioned, everything is mentioned. But the important thing here is I want to show it the way my.
So is it a historical book or a novel based on history?
It's a novel based on history, but it's factually accurate in terms of timelines, including Sikorsky's death in Gibraltar. Okay. Everything is timed so that players, although not real, have an American in it because I have to sell in the States. But the players are not real, but they walk through history in the way that it is chronologically correct. Because I want Americans and North Americans to understand the profound history Poland faced in the war, and for younger Polish citizens of Poland, they may know, may not even know. I remember telling people from another era, well, you know what the Polish army did in the West, and well, we just learning it because of the communists. No one did anything except if it came from Russia. So it's an interesting history. I think you'll enjoy it. I'm going to get it probably done in Poland in Polish.
Okay, so we're looking forward on seeing it on the bookshelves, in the stores, and
let me tell you the Amazon. I can tell you the name.
Yeah.
Who has buried the dead? Think of Katya. Who has buried the dead? And it's a profound.
Yeah, it's a profound thing. Okay, so I think that's the question I have. I think that I'll thank you for this, first of all, for your service. And thank you for always being available to Polonia for comments and such. And I think that's what you have said. It's reassuring, and anybody who is thinking about Canada for investment or doing business in here can be reassured that this is a safe country, and it will be safe to invest and to do business in
here. Thank you. Thank you over there.
Wait. 1 minute, me. And guys, I'm really impressed. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Wojtek. We talked today with Chuck Konkel, Senior Staff Sergeant, Toronto Police, and our Wojtek Śniegowski. Chuck, you must know I love Ben Affleck, for example. I love Ben Affleck.
I knew that. Yeah. I knew that.
It was nice meeting you, and thank you for being here. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you. A pleasure being with you.
Before you go, Jack, I would like to say that I am impressed as well. I didn't miss even one word. I was present all the time, and I was listening to you.
You got him off the camera. I like that. Our budget is defunding Wojtek.
Yes. Wojtek, please forgive. You are not visible now. I am. It is another experience with police officers since I am on immigration. Because I met Maggie officer in Chicago and I met several officers in Norway. They are not Polish, but I had some contact with police officers.
Well, they spoke Polish, right?
Yeah, no, they were not in Norway. No. I had some.
But you're this policeman from Chicago.
Yes, and she works maybe as in negotiation, something like that. So she helps people, but sometimes she has to negotiate as well. But
the difference is in Toronto on jest czwarty po Bogu. Czyli
once again,
jest czwarty po Bogu, czyli bardzo Maggie was the patrolman.
I thought you were first before the day.
Only in Polonia.
Only in Polonia, no question.
I think we will translate into Polish for the wider audience your interview. Wojtek, what do you think about?
Do you ask me to translate?
No, maybe not the whole meeting, but the most important part. It's only just proposition.
It's a tedious job.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we will not do that. But before Chuck goes, I wanted to ask one question, but now you.
No.
May I or not?
Okay,
Go ahead.
sure.
This is what I asked you before I switched on recording. How should I make the sign properly in Canada? Can you press? Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah.
Not this.
Okay.
Not the American. This is the British way.
Okay.
This is the Americans like it.
Okay.
Yeah, they do all kinds of stuff.
They do all kinds. They even do it without a hat on. You should not just do it without a hat.
Is it different? Is it different from American sign?
Oh yeah.
Different. And what is American one?
Well, 18,000 ways of doing it. It's like across here, over here,
Okay.
here. Like, oh no. Or chief or commissioner of police. Oh no. That's the American way.
Yeah, it's very undisciplined.
They have different. I'm sorry. There's state police, like New York State Police. They're very disciplined. The problem with the American model is they hire, and I'm like the Army, and we're all on top of us, but they hire a lot of ex-military types, and so the fellow in Minneapolis was ex-military, and they tend to be very macho. And you can't, like, tattoos here and this, like, I know they have 1,000 policemen killed a year in shootings, 1,000. So they have a different society with guns, they're crazy.
Yeah.
So, but they don't know how to differentiate. For them, everyone's a threat.
When I was in Washington, I think 2 years ago, with my friend Edward Yeshman, and we were waiting for a hero to record her. And Wojtek had a microphone plugged in, a wireless, and we parked in a forbidden place. And policeman stopped, and he asked Wojtek to move his car. So I decided to record. And policeman, hey, could you stop, please, filming, sir? And I said, oh, yes, of course, because I think if I didn't stop, he would arrested me.
Yes.
Wow.
So, yes. Because
But right now we have a serious backs in Canada. I feel safe right now.
Yes, I'm talking about differences. So I think the conclusion is that if I were in Canada, I would be more safe, yes, and treated in very bad way if I met policemen on the street. Is it conclusion?
any encounter I had with police officers, mostly traffic involved. It's if you're polite, you treat it with respect, and then there's nothing untoward to you. But I see a lot of people challenging police officers all the time, and I think it's such a stupid thing to do.
Because they don't have to talk to you.
I'm always polite in every country.
Lawyers have the right to negotiate. I tell my wife when she gets caught, be nice.
Yeah.
He's doing a job. Be nice. I'm sorry, officer. I didn't mean to. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
It's so much. But if you start going, you only did this because I'm this. You had nothing better to do. Now you've changed the tune.
Yes, I agree. I'm always polite.
Okay, but we stopped recording, right?
If you yes, do you want me to stop recording?
Yes,
We should say goodbye for audience.
All right.
Bye.
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 Thank you.